Blowing the dust out of the pan, it got right up in my eyeball. Got right past the glasses into the eyeball. That feels great. I'm not a drywall expert, and I'm also not a beginner. I'm somewhere in between, where I can confidently tape a room or more and take care of any kind of damage and patch. But getting out of beginner mode was really difficult because it seems like every video out there is either geared towards beginner stuff or very specific stuff, mostly shot by experts who have long forgotten what key things they learned while getting out of beginnersville. This video goes over some of the things I learned at my varsity condo that helped me fill in a lot of the cracks in my beginner knowledge. I hope they help you too. Fibafuse makes great patching material. I had to fill in some holes left by old lighting and have never loved how lumpy layers and layers of paper tape get when you use it on patches. Most old style ceiling boxes, metal things you can attach your lights to, are about 4 inches in diameter. Most drywall tape comes in about 2-inch widths. So to cover fully, you're going to need to put 3 pieces up and hope for not too much buildup in the overlaps. Fibafuse makes a 6-inch wide tape that when you're going over the 4-inch hole, leaves you with about 1 inch on either side. So you get perfect joint coverage on top of it being 1 piece instead of 3, and it's way easier to apply. I've never seen anyone talk about this, and I think that using Fibafuse to patch holes, especially after an electrician has gone and Swiss cheese your walls or ceilings to try to fish a new line, is gonna make someone's life out there a lot easier. Cut back more material when removing inside corners. This is another thing I've never seen any drywaller or taper or contractor or anyone anywhere on YouTube talk about. I know everyone who's watching this already knows, because you've all watched all of my previous videos, that I removed the closet from this spot. 2 walls came out, which left me with a big gap to fill with new drywall. So cut a piece of new drywall, tape the joint, and float it out, right? No. What that did was leave an entire built up inside corner on the remaining wall. When you tape an inside corner, you're not taping a right angle. Even if the framing and the boards were at a proper right angle, you actually ruin that right angle with your taping because you first build up some mud in the corner, then you put your layer of tape on, then you put more mud over that, and depending on things, you could put more mud over that too, and you can end up with a 1/4 inch buildup on the inside corners, with at least 1/8 of an inch being pretty common. I'm leaving some of this in so you can get an idea of how much work it is to repair one of these inside corners rather than just removing it. I don't know if you can tell, but there's very clearly a tape layer here that I'm getting out. But even just getting that much tape off, like, we still have a bit of rocking, but compared to that. 6-inch rolls of Fibafuse are great for messy patches. Prime your new drywall. If you're putting new drywall mud on for a patch or for a new wall, you really do need to take the separate step of priming and then painting. The paint and primer 2-in-1 is not enough primer. This bit here is an example of like the best case scenario of what happens when you don't use primer before painting. Your paint can peel off way too easily. What's more likely to happen, and what's happened for me in the past when I hired a terrible painter to paint my first house, was the unprimed patches immediately bubble and start to peel. Then inside the same closet area, we have the paint tearing off the very topmost layer of the drywall paper. This is the same problem, no primer. The primer actually helps the top layer of the drywall paper to stick to the gypsum over the long term. That's why it's tearing off the top layer of paper, leaving a little bit behind. The reason to chase down all these loose bits is if you don't, when you go to mud or paint over, you're going to end up with bubbling and flaking. And I don't mean little drywall bubbles bubbling. I mean big swaths of loose paint bubbling. So if you care about the quality of the finished look, you need to get the old loose stuff off. Scrape more. I had a lot of patching to do in this ceiling because of moving light fixtures, walls, closets, etc. The biggest takeaway from this is that if you're going to try to repair ceiling texture with patches, be sure to scrape off enough texture that you can do the whole patch, including float. I made the mistake of scraping only barely enough off, so this was me coming back at it a second time. Use big tools for drywall. Between when you saw me scraping this closet earlier and now, I primed all of the damage with Zinsser shellac-based bin primer. As I said before, you gotta prime. Now, to skim it out, I'm using a roller to apply some really thin mud and then a 24-inch skim coat blade. I got a cheap one from Amazon. I returned that cheap one to Amazon because it was too cheap. I had avoided this because I didn't have much confidence in how well I'd be able to skim coat something, but going from a little 4-inch knife to a 24-inch blade made a big, get it, difference. I did eventually skim basically the whole apartment in exactly this manner because the tradie that I had talked to about coming in to do it for me ghosted me even before we got to any particular numbers. People here are just too busy for small jobs. This applies to patches too. The bigger the tool you can use while still maintaining control, the better. Here I am going over my initial passes that I did with my 4-inch knife with my 12-inch trowel. Mud in straight lines. It is way, way, way easier to wipe in a straight line than to do a curve. It's really tempting to run your tools in curves, but to be able to maintain the correct angle of the tool to the surface while running through a curve is nearly impossible. That's why you see me going one direction and then a perpendicular direction after. Sand between coats and with a light. If you want the best quality job, you're going to need to do at least some sanding between coats. This applies especially to a renovation or patch. I didn't here because this place wasn't ever going to be a best quality job place. Don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean I was hacking my way through, but there's a big difference between actually good enough and best quality. And the with a light part. I hope whatever YouTubes you've seen about drywall work in the past have already talked about this. It's definitely beginner level stuff. Using a light shining along a wall lets you see things that you can't if the light is shining on the wall. That's why you see the shadow of my pole is going so far to the right. Scrape the whole room. I should have done this at the start, but I hadn't made my mind up yet about how I was going to deal with the ceiling, partly because getting quotes from trades here is like pulling teeth, and partly because of lacking the courage to decide I was just going to spray popcorn. Whether I was going to do my own ceiling repair or not, for the size of room and for how many times I went back to scrape just a little bit more, I should have taken the whole thing down all at once. So now I'm doing that. And I figured out that an airless paint sprayer does a heckin' good job of soaking the ceiling with water to make scraping cleaner and easier. No special chemicals here, just plain water from the sink. If you found anything in the video helpful, make sure you do the YouTube things, like and subscribe, ring the bell. Also go say hi on Twitch sometime when I'm live next over at twitch.tv/moosedoesstuff.